It's kind of crazy to think that as recently as 40 years ago, if you wanted to make beer in your home, you'd have to break the law. Thankfully, in 1978, it became legal on the federal level for people to homebrew, but unfortunately, this didn't include everyone, as certain states continued to restrict this natural right. But this all ended in 2013 when the last two holdouts, Mississippi and Alabama, passed laws making it okay for people to make beer at home. For the first time since Prohibition, it was legal to homebrew in all 50 of the United States. This was due in large part to the dedication and hard work of the American Homebrewers Association. In addition to continuing the fight for our right to brew, they're committed to growing the hobby by coordinating events such as Big Brew for National Homebrew Day and HomebrewCon. We're proud to say that the Brulosophy podcast is brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association and encourage all of our listeners to support the organization that has done so much for this hobby by becoming a member today. Hello, listeners. Thank you so much for joining us on this, the 40th episode of the Brulosophy podcast. It seems like just yesterday we were planning this whole thing out, and here we are pushing out number 40. It's been a lot of work, but it's been a lot more fun, and we really hope all of you are digging what it is that we've been doing. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and in sticking with our plan to dedicate every 10th episode to answering your questions, contributor Jake Houlihan is with me for our fourth Brü A show. What's up, Jake?
Hey, Marshall. Not much. Just recently I got to do Big Brew Day with a bunch of local clubs. The Brew Hut in Aurora, Colorado hosted, I think we had 6 or 7 clubs there, and I believe we made about 15 batches of beer between everybody there. It was a lot of fun. We had a ton of people there, and it just emphasizes how great the homebrew community really is.
Totally. And it's weird. I've been doing this homebrewing thing since 2003. It's been a long time. And, we got the website and we got the podcast. I have never once participated in a Big Brew Day. And every year I get jealous seeing all of the photos and whatnot, all these people brewing together and just having a good time. It's nothing like that has ever been organized where it is where I live. And I was just talking to my wife about it last week when it was happening, as I'm cruising through Instagram and seeing all these rad photos about how maybe we can organize something next year for that.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. I mean, it's really a great time. Everybody gets together. In fact, this year, Dry Dock Brewing, which is actually connected to the homebrew store, they brewed up, I believe, a whole batch of wort and gave that to people there. So you could sign up for your 5 gallons of wort and just come and skip that mashing process.
Yeah, that's rad. And plus, then you can, all your friends get the same wort, and then you guys can do cool experiments and whatnot, and compare and contrast. I love stuff like that. I'm pretty sure the Brew Club had a neat Big Brew Day thing that they did over video chat or something like that as well. It'll be interesting to see what comes of that next year and as that club continues to grow. But for this episode, we're going to be focusing on your questions. We get questions all the time from folks asking about random stuff, asking about brewing stuff. We're willing to answer any and all of that. So if you have any questions for us that you'd like to have answered, feel free to shoot them to me, marshall@brulosophy.com, or you can send them to feedback@brulosophy.com. I can't guarantee that we're going to get to them right away. We only do these episodes every 10th show. But we will get to them. I throw them on the list, and I'm pretty liberal with what questions we're willing to address on this. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Something I've been asked about twice already in the last week has to do with this Insane in the Yeast Strain event being thrown by Imperial Yeast the evening before HomebrewCon starts. We haven't been bringing it up in every episode, but that does not mean that it's not happening. It absolutely is. It'll be Wednesday, June 27th, starting at 6 p.m. at the Imperial Bottle Shop on Division Street in Portland, Oregon. So the night before HomebrewCon. It's going to be a ton of fun. We will be there. We're all pretty excited to sample the 12 beers they're going to have on tap, all made from the same wort and pitched with different Imperial yeast strains. So if you're in town and you're looking for something to do that night, come say hi and hang out. It's a free event. All you do is pay for your beer. We also still have some openings for our karaoke party, and we'd love to get anyone who's interested on the guest list early. If you want to party like it's 1984, all you have to do is email me, marshall@brulosophy.com, and I'll get you details on how you can make a donation to secure your spot. It's going to be a blast. We're having a bunch of vitamin R available. We'll have some snacks available, and attendees can also purchase their own food and drinks from the full bar. It's going to be a cool night. If you get that reference, you know what's up. For those of you who live in or around Yakima, Washington, come hang out with us at the Fresh Hop Ale Festival happening on September 29th. Contributor Brian Hall and I will be up there for the weekend, just chilling with our friends from Yakima Valley Hops, drinking beer at places like Varietal Brewing Company and Bale Breaker, hanging out with all the other rad folks in the hop industry, rubbing cones, doing all that fun stuff. Seriously, Yakima during hop harvest is one of the funnest places you can be at that time if you're into brewing and beer. Jake, you got to get out to Yakima sometime for hop harvest, man.
I know, I do. You guys looked like you had so much fun there last year, and I mean, how could it not be fun? Just all those people from the beer industry there sampling great beer and doing fun things.
Yeah, the craft brewers and home brewers and whatnot, they literally take over Yakima for like a month. But yeah, we'll be up there at the end of September, so let us know if you're going to be around. We'd love to hang out. I want to thank everyone who's been using our links to do their online shopping. We appreciate it immensely. If you like what we're doing and you want to show us some love, head over to brulosophy.com/support to find a list of links to bookmark and use whenever you do your shopping online. If you want to be rewarded for your support, you can become a patron of Brulosophy by pledging a small monthly contribution. In return, you'll receive things like access to the Brew Crew private forum, secret contributor recipes, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A with a very special guest. This has become a super popular option over at Patreon for us. Coming up later this week is NEIPA expert and soon-to-be professional brewer at Sapwood Cellars, Scott Janish. He's going to be answering patron questions for an hour from Norway. He just happens to be on vacation, and he still agreed to call in. We're going to be doing this one a little bit earlier, American time, so hopefully we can pull in more international patrons as well. We've also got some other great guests coming up. Vinny Chilurzo just agreed to do this thing for us. So that's Russian River, Mr. Pliny the Elder himself. They're always a really fun time. To learn more about how you can be rewarded for helping us out, just head over to patreon.com/Brulosophy. Finally, if you haven't already, please leave us a rating and a review wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Not only do we take the feedback seriously, but those ratings help people to find us, which is pretty cool. Thanks to everyone who's taken the time to do this already. We really do appreciate it. All right, we've got some feedback, which this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in triclover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique and hard to find items for both the home and craft brewing markets, including high quality stainless fittings at competitive prices and very fast shipping. They're also excited to announce the release of the BCS 482 control system. The BCS 482 provides everything needed to fully automate your brewery. Learn more about this and the other great gear they offer at brewershardware.com. And don't forget to mention Brulosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. All right, so Ryan Russ writes in with yet more feedback in regards to our recent episode on gelatin finding, as well as the episode on carbonation methods. Here's what he says. He says, in episode 35, that's the one on gelatin finding, you mentioned that gelatin can cause yeast to drop out of solution. And in episode 36, you went over the bottle conditioning process, which involves adding sugar to the beer for the yeast to eat, creating carbonation inside the bottle. This might be a stupid question, but is it a bad idea to use gelatin on a beer that will be bottle conditioned? It seems to me that there could be a concern that the gelatin would remove too much yeast from solution and hinder the carbonation process. Were any of the beers that were bottle conditioned for experiments mentioned in episode 36 fined with gelatin? Jake, you've bottle conditioned more than I have in the last couple of years, but not too much. What are your thoughts on gelatin fining bottle conditioned beers?
Well, first off, none of the beers for those specific experiments that I did were gelatin fined. I've heard of people gelatin finding and bottle conditioning, and it seems to work just fine. I don't think I've ever actually done it. I don't see why it wouldn't work. Yeah, there's still plenty of yeast.
It's a totally valid and common concern that I've read about online. One I know that many brewers who bottle condition have considered. Full disclosure, I haven't bottle conditioned a beer myself since I started using gelatin. I hate the process, but I know quite a few people who regularly do. One of them is my twin brother, Marco, who has sent me many beers that were absolutely crystal clear, even after he sent them from New York, and beautifully carbonated. So it does work. One of the things that he mentioned to me when I was talking to him about this is that it does seem to take maybe a little bit longer, sometimes at least, for that beer to get fully carbonated, which could be a function of the fact that maybe less yeast is in solution, but there's still absolutely enough yeast there to carbonate your beer. One thing that I notice when drinking his beers as well is I have a local friend who does the same thing. That the cake at the bottom of the bottle, that little trube layer at the bottom of the bottle, is always really fine. It almost looks like the bottom of like a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That kind of thick, that really thin layer of yeast and trube is kind of sticky and sticks to the bottom of the bottle. So in many ways, it seems like it might actually be kind of helpful.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, first off, you don't have that huge gunky layer at the bottom. I know when I did that bottle conditioned New England IPA experiment, some of those bottles got like a nice half-inch at the bottom just because NEPA has so much yeast in it when you package it at first.
Yeah, especially if you're packaging, warm, like I think a lot of bottle conditioners do. So, but Ryan, yeah, I say give it a shot, man. And one thing I wouldn't recommend is finding with gelatin and then leaving that gelatin fined beer in a cold chamber or something for like 2 months and then doing that. You might have to add some yeast back, but from what I've heard, from what I've seen, it seems to work just fine. If you have any show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com, or you can leave us a message by calling 951-444-0320. All right. When I'm not drinking beer, I'm drinking either Moscow Mules, don't hate, or whiskey. I really do like bourbon. One spirit I cannot stand is gin. Even when someone swears they've got one that I'll like, I still hate it. So don't try. It's just not my thing. And even when I'm drinking beer, it's usually lower ABV styles: Pilsner, Vienna Lager, Pale Ale, Blonde Ale. So I wasn't too sure about a gin barrel-aged double IPA our friend Jake Freshour sent in from Breakside Brewery out of Portland, Oregon.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Yeah, it's an IPA. I can already tell. We're learned men. We are learned men.
I can smell it's an IPA.
It's very IPA-y.
I don't even know if I want to taste it. Whew, it's going to be rough on me. I can tell. Whew, very flowery.
It's very, it's very, I don't know. Let's go out on a limb and say it tastes kind of double as strong as what a normal IPA would be.
Strong.
Might be a double IPA.
Maybe.
It could also be anything else. I don't know.
And I don't.
It's a little overpowering, I'd say.
I don't believe I'm going to finish.
It's a little overpowering. I probably wouldn't put it on tap. I mean, I'm going to drink it.
It's definitely not my thing. I don't like the way it smells. I don't like the flowery taste. I just don't like it.
It is really flowery. There's a lot of flowery.
I would put it in the juniper category. I'm just saying.
I just feel like it's a lot of flavor. A little, maybe just a little too much for me.
It's kind of warming my face, though.
I would agree it's strong. It might be like a double IPA with like double power. It definitely tastes like when my wife said, "Don't get drunk when you do this." It tastes like the beer that's going to make me not hold to that. It's going to cross me over.
I could see that. I am not going to finish it. It's going to be rough on me.
That's dumb. I'm going to give this 3 or 4 Jersey Tims. It's a good beer that I would drink. It's just not a beer that I would drink.
I've had worse.
Do you know what juniper is? It's a berry from a conifer tree.
What? Nobody cares about your science. We want to make judgments with our feelings around here. You know that.
It is a double IPA.
I nailed it.
Holy shit.
That was aged in gin barrels. What is gin made of?
Don't treat me like a child.
Juniper berries, dude.
No shit.
Damn.
You nailed juniper. You've been guessing for the last 30 reviews and you finally stuck it.
I knew it would work one of these times.
Stuck it, dude. You did it. That's it. We leave we retire on top. Retire as champions.
Dude, they nailed it, Jake. I mean, for once, finally, Tim gets to say that he tasted juniper, and he was actually right.
I mean, it seems like he's been saying that now for the last few episodes, so it's good to finally be right, I guess.
I know. You throw enough darts, you hit the bullseye every once in a while. I thought it was pretty good, though. I mean, they both... Jersey, right off the bat, was talking about how it's stronger, and it certainly was. But I do think he was picking up maybe a little bit of that spirit character, making it feel like it was a bigger beer. But it was a double IPA. I really appreciate Jake. One of the guys who's brewing for us for HomebrewCon sent that in from local Breakside Brewery up in Portland. And, I like I said, I'm not a big fan of gin. I'm not a big fan of juniper. Tim thinks there's juniper in everything, so I am a big fan of what he doesn't like. But that's just not a flavor I like. I definitely would not drink that beer regularly. But as far as what I would expect a gin barrel aged double IPA to taste like, it had all of that. It just wasn't necessarily something that I would find myself ordering. Have you ever had anything from Breakside?
Yeah, I go to Portland a lot for work, so I've had Breakside quite a bit. I love their just regular IPA. and I believe it took gold at GABF in IPA category a few years ago. So
That's awesome.
It's definitely
man.
a solid beer.
Yeah. I'm excited to give them a shot when we're up there. I won't be ordering the gin barrel aged double IPA, but to each their own. I'm sure there are some people who love it. Well, if you have a beer or any other alcoholic beverage, whether you personally brewed it or not, that you want reviewed on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, when we come back, answers to your questions. Hang tight. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Alrighty, let's jump right into this and get to some questions.
First question comes from Colin Stacy of Louisiana. He writes, I'm currently studying for the BJCP exam. I'm looking at the beer faults page and some of the troubleshooting steps they list. Many of these steps suggest things like reducing the fineness of your grain crush to reduce astringency, or reducing trub that goes into the fermenter, which are in opposition to findings from your experiments.
Oh boy.
What do y'all make of these compared to the established troubleshooting mantra? I know that some of these findings have impacted you and your listeners' brewing practices, but how should an aspiring judge reconcile these differences? I know I have to choose the established response for the multiple choice exam, but what would I tell a brewer on his or her score sheet?
This is a really good question. And I think the key first, right up front, the key is yes, answer when you're taking any of the tests, you answer it like it's written. That's how you're going to be ranked. That's how you're going to be scored, But absolutely, we have, part of what's driving the experiment series is to test these claims out, is to see, can we produce an astringent beer if we overcrush our grain, or what's going to happen if we put too much trub into the fermenter. For the longest time when I took the BJCP test, I'm only certified and I don't judge much at all anymore these days. It's just not something that gets me off. But for a long time, you take something like trub. In my mind, the biggest sign that you put too much trub in the fermenter was that you had a hazy beer. And what did we end up finding out every single time so far is that it actually produces a much clearer beer much faster. So, I think my opinion, at least, Jake, you might differ from me on this, is write down what they expect to see, and then if you're doing if you're actually judging and you're tasting astringency in a beer, just don't be absolute. Maybe make some speculations. And this is when I'm judging what I'll write on the score sheets. If I taste something that I think is astringency, because we're not always right about what it is we're perceiving. My typical thing would be like, perceiving what seems to be astringency, which is said to be caused by, overcrushed grain, too high of pH in the mash, stuff like that. And that way it gives them something to think about, but it also doesn't make you look like you think you know everything. I don't know. Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think we're both pretty similar in that, we don't really speak in absolutes too much. For me, I don't know if it's just my profession, but I find like if you're to go into something with an absolute view of, hey, this is DMS, you need to do this, this, and this. I mean, it to me, it seems embarrassing, but I get it though. People are submitting their beers for critical feedback. Some people just want to win, but some people do want that feedback. So I think it is important, you as the judge, to let them know what you at least perceive, whether that's, DMS, whether that's diacetyl, astringency, anything. Don't necessarily prescribe a fix, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The internet does exist. People can use that to find it. But let them know what you think you perceive.
Well, and another approach that I take, and probably the most experienced judge that we've got on the Brülosophy crew is Malcolm Fraser, who he judges next to Gordon Strong all the time, and he's actually really into it. But that doesn't change my opinion about how I think things could be approached in a better way. I'm just going to go out and say, I think a lot of judges, they get into judging because on some deeply psychological level, it makes them feel better about themselves. And so to be the one who's able to identify diacetyl, even if it's not there, it kind of makes them feel good. Like, well, I detected it, haha. I had a beer, in fact, in a experiment that we did on boil length with the Pilsner malt, a Pilsner malt grist, boiled a beer for 30 minutes. And when I just for fun, after data was collected, I served that beer to a couple of people and told them it was a 30-minute boil. And only after telling them that did they perceive DMS. Well, guess what? I had those tested in the lab. There was no DMS in those beers, And that's the thing, though, is we want to think that we're good at this thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like if we're a little bit, we rely less on the superlatives and we're a little bit more equivocal, then the hobby stays a little bit more humble, and people, I think, are more capable of learning and becoming better judges and becoming better beer evaluators. And I'm so on a soapbox right now, so I'm going to go ahead and step down for a minute.
I really don't have too much else to add. I think you hit all the points I was thinking of, and good luck on your exam.
Yeah. Thanks, Colin, for writing in. The next question comes from Cameron Gatzow in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Here's what he says. I've brewed about 9 all-grain batches since I started brewing, and 3 of them have had similar off flavors, which I would describe as astringency. The flavor was puckering and left a lingering bad taste in my mouth. They essentially tasted like bad homebrew, if that makes sense. Yeah, Cameron, that makes sense. These were 3 different styles, he says. A Chimay clone, which is a Belgian ale, a wee heavy, so like a Scottish-style beer, and a brown ale. He says, I've discussed this with experienced brewer friends, and they don't seem to understand the cause. I've done a bunch of research, and I just keep going around in circles. I thought it might be fermentation temperature, but the last batch was well within range. I used Danstar Nottingham ale yeast and fermented at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees Celsius, which cooled to 64 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 degrees Celsius once fermentation slowed down. Then I thought maybe I transferred too much trub, but your experiments squashed that idea. Then I thought maybe I was pulling tannins from crushing the grain too fine or sparging too hot. But when I double-checked the measurement on my mill, if anything, it's a little coarse. And none of the batches were sparged over 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 77 degrees Celsius. So there shouldn't be any problems there. I know it's not a sanitation issue because I'm a freak about that. And I know it's not my water because my neighbor makes great beer all the time with zero adjustment. So presumably they're getting the same water. The only other thing I can think of is grain in the boil kettle, often small amounts stuck to my brew paddle after stirring the mash, or after the mash gets transferred to my boil kettle. Could just a few grains create these off flavors if present in the boil? I'm really sick of making random bad batches of beer. Some of my other batches have turned out great while using this exact same process. I'm out of ideas. Anything you can think of that I might be missing? This actually kind of goes along with what we were talking about in that first question. Jake, what say ye, man?
Yeah, I mean, first off, there's definitely a lot there. But we're assuming, I guess, that you've correctly diagnosed this as astringent, which, we don't necessarily know because we're not tasting your beers in perceiving what you're saying is astringent. But you do say it's just random batches that turned out bad. So personally, I don't necessarily think I would be so quick to dismiss water as the culprit. Your neighbor making great beer without adjustments. And even though we haven't yet shown that like high pH can cause astringent flavors in beer with our data, I mean, it's definitely correlated with increased tannin extraction from grain husks. So a high pH and potentially over sparging, could lend to an astringent flavor, or at least that's what is commonly believed to happen when astringent flavors are present in beer. It's possible that your water is high in bicarbonate randomly. I know I use an RO filter, and I'll see my total dissolved solids in my water jump from anywhere from 100 to 300, just days apart. So it could be something like that, maybe. I don't know, your thoughts?
Yeah. So, okay. Going back to that first question. First off, I feel like, when you watch Price is Right and there's Plinko, and I think about this with beer evaluation a lot. If you take a couple of common off descriptors, if you will. So you got astringency and diacetyl and DMS and fusel alcohols and all this, and you put those at the bottom and you drop a Plinko chip, the likelihood that somebody's going to pick one of those is like the same likelihood of that Plinko chip landing in it is how I kind of look at this. I get the astringency thing. I get that we think we have this ability to pick that up, and I think Cameron was pretty good about pointing out that he's not necessarily sure if it's astringency or not, but that's how he would describe it. My thing is this, and it's just from experience. I've fermented a lot of beers with Nottingham, that Danstar Nottingham ale yeast. I do not use that yeast anymore. To me, in every beer I've made using it, and sometimes it works. To me, I get kind of this, I get kind of a tartness, which, the way he's describing these beers, I could see how maybe we're getting the same thing. I've heard this from other folks. It's just not something that I enjoy in my beer, and when I don't use that yeast, which I know a lot of people love. I'm not dissing Nottingham. Use it if you like it. It's just my own perception. I get this character from that yeast that sounds a lot like what Cameron is talking about here. Now, I have to believe he's not fermenting a Chimay clone with Nottingham yeast, and if he's using like a Belgian strain in a Chimay clone, and he's still getting the same character, if that character is the same as with these other beers that he's making, then the only thing that my mind goes to is water, like you, and either water or I know he says he doesn't think it is, or some form of a contamination, because you can get kind of that puckering, not even necessarily sour, but kind of a puckering astringent like character from certain types of contamination. So, but those are the only things I can think of that it might be. I would try, if I were to give Cameron some advice directly, it would be try a new yeast strain, maybe try some liquid yeast, build it up in a starter, and see if that doesn't change things a little bit. You think that might, I don't know, you think that might at least help him to hone in on what the issue is?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know. I mean, we've yet to really show that pitch rate matters, but I think with those English strains that can tend to be somewhat estery, I'd be interested to do a few experiments on that and see if, potentially he's under pitching something like Danstar Nottingham, which is a pretty fruity yeast, and maybe that's causing a different flavor than if it were pitched at a higher rate. I don't know.
Yeah.
In terms of like a different off flavor that I think is, to me, I think is similar to astringency, or at least in how it's perceived, maybe is oxidation. I'd be interested to see what his end of fermentation processes like
cold
intake
side
tagging or
packaging,
bottling.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would too. One thing I want to point out, we say it all the time, one experiment does not a principle make. And, we've done 3 Trube experiments now, and one of them was significant. The latest one that we did was significant. Now, and this one was very extreme. It was a cool fermented Pilsner that stayed on that yeast cake on that Trube cake for a long time. And I did not like that beer. One of my buddies, you might have heard of him. His name's Jersey. He actually described the flavor of that high Trube beer as being like stinky milk, not sour, but just kind of that kind of smell. So to me, I described it as flubber, and I don't even know what flubber is, but that's just kind of the impression that I got. So it could be that too much Trube is contributing to something. Another question he asked had to do with having some grain in the boil. I mean, we've done an experiment on that. I think we've done a couple experiments on that seem to show that it doesn't make much of a difference, especially in the small amounts that Cameron is referring to here. I don't think it's going to contribute, a tannin character that you're going to be able to perceive. So yeah. So my first thing is, try a new yeast, man. Give something else a shot and see if that doesn't fix your issue for you. And then after that, have your water tested, see where you're at with your water. And if that doesn't fix things, then time to dig in a little bit deeper. But, all right, next question.
This one comes from Greg Laughlin via email. How quickly do you raise fermentation temperature after activity has slowed? I use Python running on a Raspberry Pi for temperature control, along with a thermowell, stopper, and firm wrap heaters. After 3 or 4 days into fermentation, I run a script that linearly increases my set temperature, initially around 66F, until it reaches 72F, where it stays at 72. The temperature rises smooth and equates to a 1 degree Fahrenheit increase every 12 hours. It takes 3 days to rise to 72 with this method, while it only takes a few hours to reach 72 if I simply change my set temperature to 72. Do you think a slow rise in temperature can have an effect on how well yeast clean up byproducts?
I certainly used to, but I don't. I'm just too lazy, and I cannot taste a difference between a slowly, raised temperature for like a diacetyl rest, or even if I'm just making an ale just to encourage full attenuation. And one where I just change the temperature in the chamber. So that's the latter is which I do nowadays. I honestly, just from what we know microbiologically speaking, and I'm no microbiologist, but those yeast the bulk of their work is done in the first 48 hours of fermentation. And so, I let them roll for my typical ale fermentation these days is 3 or 4 days at 66 degrees Fahrenheit for pretty much every style of ale. And my warm fermented lagers are the same way. And then I bump it up to 72 and just let it hang out for another 4 or 5 days until I muster up the motivation to keg them up.
Yeah. And I think he kind of like hits on something that, I think I'd like to address is that the raising of the temperature to clean up byproducts, yeast are constantly cleaning up byproducts during fermentation. Rising the temperature just speeds up their activity. So just causes that to happen faster. It's not like it goes to 72 and all of a sudden, boom, oh, there's diacetyl. Let me clean that up.
Yeah, right.
They're doing that all throughout fermentation. For me, though, I do rate, because I ferment a lot of lagers at cold, and I do usually raise about like 2 degrees per 12 hours. I don't know why. I think it's probably a good one for an experiment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something we've never tested out. Is like we've never done like a diacetyl rest experiment. We've done traditional lagering versus quick lagering and all that. We need to repeat that, but that would incorporate basically the stuff that Greg is asking about here on some level. And but I mean, you think about this. He didn't include degrees Celsius, but what he's talking about here is like a 2 to 3 degree raise. A 2 to 3 degree Celsius raise in temperature, and doing that at a half a degree Celsius every 12 hours. I just really don't think yeast are that fickle, and we talk constantly about quality product and all that stuff. And we've got really high quality yeast nowadays that we're using. I don't think they need to be treated like that. And it's a little bit more work to do that. I mean, he's got a really nice technologically inclined setup here. So it's easy for him, but I just do it all in one fell swoop.
Yeah, so basically you're just mishandling your yeast.
Yeah.
They can handle it.
Exactly. All right. So then Steph Staw from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania writes in to say, I plan on brewing my first bourbon and oak-aged beer shortly. First, is it acceptable to add both bourbon and oak cubes to a primary fermenter, aka is it okay to forego a secondary? Additionally, how long should I let the bourbon oak sit on the fermented beer before bottling? Let's address that first very, very important question first, Jake.
Yeah, I personally brewed with oak in spirits a couple times and actually have a small barrel. It is definitely okay to add any kind of oak cubes, chips, spirals to the primary fermentation vessel. A barrel is obviously a little bit different in that it's a secondary vessel, not really a secondary fermenter, but yeah, add them right to primary.
That's my take as well. I've brewed with wood, I think, 3 times in my entire brewing history. I'm not a big fan of wooded beers, at least having them on tap at my house, so I don't do them often. But from what I've gleaned from people who do brew these beers often, you can add bourbon and your oak directly to primary. This idea that you have to make these additions in a secondary, I don't know where. I kind of know where it comes from. I don't know why though. It doesn't make that much sense to me. It's almost as if like having those additives, whether it's wood or dry hops or fruit or whatever, in contact with that yeast is going to somehow ruin it. No, it doesn't. I mean, there's still yeast in solution in a secondary. So my look at it is it's almost like risk aversion. So if I keep it all in primary and I can add as much of that stuff as I can to primary, then I'm reducing the risk of picking up a contamination or of additional oxidation that I don't want that you would pick up by racking over to another fermenter. So that's kind of my take. I have all of the wood beers that I have made, all of the fruited beers that I've made, which again isn't very many. They have all been done in primary. All of those additions have been done in primary, and then I kind of treat them the same afterwards as I do any other beer that I make.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of how long would you let the bourbon oak sit on it? Personally, with oak, I think it's going to depend on how much flavor you're looking for and how new the wood is. So if you're reusing oak cubes a bunch of times, it's probably going to take a little bit longer to get that flavor. For me, typically, like 1 to 3 weeks, I've gotten the flavor that I want. Just taste it. I don't know, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks until it gets to where you want it.
Yeah. One trick that I've read about and that I've heard of, I think Brian has advocated for this actually is rather than adding like however many ounces of bourbon plus fresh oak, one thing you can do to kind of replicate that used whiskey barrel thing or whatever it is, that used bourbon barrel, is to soak your oak in bourbon for a certain amount of time. You can put them in like a 1 quart mason jar, let that oak soak in there in the bourbon, and it absorbs a lot of that flavor. And then you can either just dump all of that, so with the bourbon that's in it, into your primary and let that go for about a week or so. Everyone I talk to about when you're adding wood to beers, taste it until it tastes good, and then it's time to package. So you can dump that whole thing with the bourbon, or you can strain off the bourbon, and now you've got like a nice super oaky bourbon that you can do whatever you want with, and then just add those add whatever type of wood you're using. The type of wood that you use also apparently will have a difference on or have an impact on the amount of time that it needs to be in contact with the beer for it to really contribute its character. So I think chips are known for being a little bit quicker than cubes. You've got honeycombs out there, which are a pretty popular option, and I've used those before. They work really well. So that's sort of the way I look at it is if I were to make a bourbon oak Russian Imperial Stout or something like that, I would probably soak the wood in the bourbon for a while and then strain off the bourbon and add that really wet wood to the beer.
Yeah, or even just add that spirit right at packaging.
Yeah, I guess that would be the other option, right? Is leave the wood out. You've got this nice oaky, especially if it's fresh oak, you've got this really nice oak flavored bourbon that you could just add right at packaging. Well, cool. Hopefully that answer from 2 people who don't use wood that much suffices for you, Seth. Whew. Well, it's time for a breather. We'll be right back after this break. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewer's Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Founded in 1978 by brewing pioneer Charlie Papazian, the American Homebrewers Association is a division of the Brewers Association focused specifically on protecting and promoting the hobby of homebrewing. In addition to their work lobbying for the rights of homebrewers across the country, they're also the primary sponsor of Brewlosophy.com. By joining the AHA, not only are you supporting their cause, but you get a ton of benefits as well. Discounts at brewers across the U.S., early access to tickets for events like the Great American Beer Festival, and you get to attend HomebrewCon, the world's biggest gathering of homebrewers. Head over to Brewlosophy.com/AHA now to sign up to become a member.
Time for our next question, which comes from Adam Keach from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm dying to upgrade my setup, but every time I get my heart set on a piece of equipment, I find a podcast saying it won't make a difference. For example, stainless steel mash tun for mash temp stability, mash temp experiment. A yeast starter kit, pitch rate experiments. Better fermentation temperature control, various fermentation temp experiments. Equipment to help with close transfers to reduce oxidation, oxidation experiment. I'm sure there are more I'm missing, but my main question is, what does matter? I want a shiny new piece of equipment, but I want it to make a difference. Any thoughts? The other option is a kegerator keezer, so I can have more than one beer on tap at a time.
So what does matter is your enjoyment of the process, and I personally think controllability, whether or not it matters in an experiment that we've done, the ability to control my process and to know what I'm doing is consistent so that I can reproduce a beer over and I mean, there are multiple things that go into making a beer. There are multiple variables. And, you know, to remind our audience yet again, we isolate a single variable. For the most part, we isolate a single variable and we test that. There's some evidence out there that seems to suggest that when you put a bunch of variables together, they do produce some sort of a difference. But if you're trying to rely on the results of experiments to determine what you're going to buy, in your brewery, I don't know if that's the best use of our experiment results, but I use a insulated stainless steel mash tun. You just bought a couple yourself, Jake. I think it's more about what makes the process for us more enjoyable, maybe a little bit easier, more consistent. My stainless steel mash tun is going to last forever. My cooler MLT lasted a while, but was nasty and stunk and didn't close anymore. So there's those types of little benefits as well.
Yeah. Well, I think his last option, he said, kegerator keezer. For me, that would be, number one new piece of equipment I would get if I were him. I think to your point, that increases the enjoyment of homebrewing. It did quite a bit for me.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I'd be brewing today if it weren't for my ability to, package my beer in 15 minutes and have it ready the next day, to be honest.
Right, for sure. Overall, I don't think the results of the experiments really influence what I buy. I don't know if it does with you, but I don't know, just have fun, get what you want. get what looks good in your garage to you. And
Yeah.
do it like that.
I don't know if it influences so much the stuff that I buy as much as it does my thinking about process. But there's still a part of, it's a hobby, homebrewing is a hobby. And there's a part of this whole thing that for me, like the acquisition of things that make the process, and this is my take on it, but that make the process smooth. That's a part of the hobby. That's what if I'm going to spend my money on something, that's what I'll spend my money on. Absolutely. Keyser is the number one thing, but he says equipment to help with close transfers, to reduce, cold side oxidation. Dude, I mean, if you're making a bunch of New England IPA or beers that you're going to age over a long time, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to reduce cold side oxidation, even if it doesn't have a crazy difference in some of our experiments. That's just good process.
Yeah, I totally agree. And same with anything else that you ask about with like a yeast starter. I mean, I know we've kind of gone away with it recently just because Imperial packages so many cells in their packs, but I make yeast starters all the time.
Yeah, so do I. I still make yeast starters when I'm not doing a short and shoddy. If I'm not doing a regular, a viability type starter that everyone knows about, I'm doing a vitality starter, and so I'm still using my flask all the time. It's just, again, it really is like, my whole goal when I make a batch of beer, even if it's not for the experiments, is to ensure that I'm going to have a beer at the end of the day that I want to drink. And if I can do a couple of these relatively inexpensive things, to ensure that, then I'm going to do it. That's just kind of my take. And at the same time, and this, maybe this is way out there, kind of a weird excuse, but I love the industry. I love the folks who are making this awesome stuff so that we can brew good beer. Look at where we're at today from where we were just 10 years ago. There was no one making insulated stainless steel mash tuns like SS Brewtech is, or all of the kettle options that we've got with all of the different valves. And it's awesome. And I'm cool to support those guys, by using their gear. So, all right, Adam, go buy some stuff, man. Go have a good time with your brewing and do what makes you happy. Next question comes from Bradley Willen, who lives in Apex, North Carolina. He says, do you do any steps to sanitize when fining with gelatin? When I fine with gelatin, I don't tend to take precautions around sanitation. I haven't been bitten by this yet, but I just had a couple batches go weird, which I think is, it was a combination of a new water source and a new yeast strain. I swear they tasted good when I sampled before fining. Sanitizing the measuring cup and thermometer is easy enough, but what about the packet of gelatin?
It's kind of funny. I hadn't really thought about this until I was reading through this question, but I don't think I've ever sanitized my measuring cup when I'm preparing my gelatin solution. I do with the thermometer. I don't know why, but never have with the cup. These days I just add the water to that glass measuring cup, add the gelatin, microwave for 30 seconds, and throw it in the keg. Probably not best practice, but
I mean, that's what I've done, and it's never led to a contamination for me. I was talking with someone recently about whether or not microwaves kill bacteria, like beer spoilage bacteria, and apparently only after a certain amount of time. It's not like they immediately explode or whatever. I'm not totally certain on that, but I'm always using glass measuring cup with about 40 seconds, give or take, in the microwave with hot water in it. I've been bringing that water to a boil, and the gelatin still works. It's not denaturing or whatever. And I just have to believe that when I take that super hot measuring cup out of the microwave, that there's no bugs on it. And just anecdotally speaking, it hasn't, like with you, Bradley, this hasn't led to any problems for me yet. So, if you keep a bucket of sanitizer around, I guess there's no harm in giving your measuring cup a quick dip before you start your process. But I haven't done that. Hasn't seemed to have been an issue.
Same.
Yeah. So, well, before we get to the next question, I want to remind everyone about our awesome sponsors, Imperial Yeast, who are making the fermentation process more exciting and way less stressful by packing 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into every pitch right pouch. Over double what other labs will give you, meaning fermentation kicks off fast and finishes quickly, leaving you with the delicious beer you envisioned. Imperial Yeast has strains for every style you can think of, and they offer supreme customer service. Seriously awesome dudes over there. They care just as much about homebrewers as they do professionals. Check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer at imperialyeast.com. You will not be disappointed. All right. Russell Barth writes in from Jonesboro, Tennessee. He says, I'm catching up on some of the previous podcasts and have questions after hearing your kegging procedure. If you leave your lid on while you are kegging, how do you keep from overfilling them? This is such a good question. Thanks in advance, and thanks to all of the contributors for putting out such great content. Jake, what do you do? Because you are when you keg with your lid on, and you are, getting rid of that air using some sort of like a disconnect on your gas out, right?
I usually run a little beer out of the gas quick disconnect, and then I shut off my valve.
I think we've all had the experience. Those of us who keg this way, I'm pretty sure we've all had the experience of like going inside, kind of trusting that we didn't make too much beer, and going inside and coming out to our keg sitting in a pool of beer.
Right. Like I've been cutting down on my batch size. I used to brew, I think, 6 gallons into the fermenter. And then I ended up leaving like a half gallon in the fermenter. So now I cut that down to 5.5, and I still run out a little bit out of the gas disconnect. So I'm probably going to plan on cutting that down to like 5.25,
right.
And see if that works. But you could put your keg on a scale, and just calculate how much beer would weigh at 5 gallons and cut it off when it gets to that. I'm too lazy for that.
Yeah, that seems like a lot of work. I mean, one of my least favorite parts of the brewing process is packaging. I'm not going to add more to it. What I do is I've learned that if I rack about 5.25, I use the SS BrewTech stainless brew buckets for almost all of my batches these days. And if I rack about 5.25 gallons of beer to my brew bucket, or of wort to my brew bucket from the kettle, and then ferment that amount, the dip tube. So I don't use the dip tubes in my brew buckets anymore. I actually prefer the way they are without the dip tube. And I've learned that at 5.25 gallons of, which I believe is almost 19 liters or so, at 5.25 gallons of wort in there, once the beer is fermented out, I can fill up an entire keg until the brew bucket stops running, and I will not overfill my keg. The other way that I do this is when I cold crash in primary, which I've not been doing as much lately, though I will start doing again, because we've got some cool ideas on how to reduce suck back of oxygen into the beer, but that's for another show. When I cold crash, that beer is so cold that you can sort of follow the condensation up the side of the keg when you're filling it. And it's easy enough to just go and swipe your finger on it or feel where that cold line starts. And I don't know if people are aware, but the 5 gallon mark is that top seam on the top of most kegs. It's that seam just below. You have about an inch or two until you hit the kind of the rubber handles. And so as soon as I start to see that condensation kind of kissing that lip, that's when I'll, if I've got more beer than I expected, that's when I'll cut off my valve and just move the beer to my keezer.
Yeah, it's simple. Or just run a little out the gas disconnect. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything.
The only thing I don't like about doing that is in the few times that I've done that, that beer is touching the dip tube, the gas dip tube. So if I'm burst carbonating, which I do on almost all my batches, when I go to relieve the pressure, I use Pinlock kegs, not ball locks. So
you shoot some gas out, or
I shoot some beer into my face. Exactly. So that's something that you can buy PRVs lids for Pinlock kegs. Apparently, I don't care that much, and so I always just fill them up to where it's below the gas dip tube. That is one annoying aspect of overfilling a keg. If you have Pinlock kegs, is that you got to deal with that. In the times where I've done that, what I'll do is just I have towels in my garage that I use just for brewing, and I'll just kind of cover the disconnect or when I'm depressing and relieving the keg of that pressure, and it just catches all the foam and whatnot. So, but yeah, thanks, Russell. Hopefully that helps you out, man. Next question.
So this comes from Frank Aerosmith. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, from San Diego, California.
Yeah, he's actually got 3 questions here, and we'll finish up on his third one. There's some good questions here.
So question 1 on water chemistry. With an appropriate water profile, is it necessary to add yeast nutrients or energizers? My thought is that the minerals in these additives are the same as the ones that were added to the water.
Quick answer, no, it's not necessary. I say that because I've never, ever used nutrients or energizers at all. But I think what he's getting at is if your water profile is right, does it have the nutrients that are purported to help with fermentation and all that other stuff? To be honest, I'm not totally sure. What do you think, Jake?
Well, I know the one commonly cited mineral that's lacking in wort is zinc, which most yeast nutrients have. Like you said, you've never used yeast nutrient. Doesn't seem to be preventing you from making beer. We are pitching healthy lab grade yeast every time, pretty much.
Yeah.
It can't hurt. I add it to every batch. I've never noticed it. I don't know. I have noticed with my cider, though, if I don't add nutrients, they're pretty laggy and take about a month compared to about a week if I add nutrient.
Yeah, I'm excited to make. I think I'm going to throw together a batch of cider today, in fact, and I just picked up some yeast nutrient to experiment with. And I'm going to add some to my cider as well. But there's a lot of talk about water chemistry having some sort of an impact on conversion during the mash, on fermentation activity, all of this stuff. We've done a lot of water chemistry experiments, and the most of them are coming back significant, which suggests that they have some sort of an impact on the character of the finished beer, right? Flavor, aroma, mouthfeel, that stuff. What we haven't noticed that much, and I think most surprising are the low and high mash pH experiments that we've done, is that they don't have a crazy impact on these other factors, on things like conversion or on fermentation. They might have an impact, but it's not as it's not as nuts as I might have expected before doing the experiments.
Right, same.
Yeah.
It seems like the wort is pretty nutrient rich, and it just seems to really help the yeast and produce a healthy fermentation.
Wort wants to be beer. That's the way I look at it. Is wort wants to be beer, and we're just there to kind of coax it into that. So,
right.
Well, Frank's second question is about kettle trube. He says, I've been doing pressurized fermentations in corny kegs, and I really like this method. I've been sticking to the process of racking from primary fermenting keg to serving keg. But I'm wondering if I even need to transfer to serving keg, or could I just serve straight from the fermenting keg? I've heard about cask-style ales where this is done, and even seen some keg accessories for sale that replace the solid dip tube with a floating one, which allows beer to be pulled from the top of the keg. Jake, you know about those. Is it potentially harmful to leave the trube in the primary vessel and serve straight from it? Is there something done in the cask fermenting process that I may be missing? Before we answer this, I think he might be confusing cask beer. My understanding is that cask beers are already basically fermented, but they are conditioned in cask, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. You can ferment and serve from the same vessel. In a corny keg, I think this would work really well. Having your dip tube placed at the bottom of it is the only issue I can really see, and I would definitely echo his thought on a floating dip tube and probably try to get something like that.
I'm not sure if Oliver agrees with your summation of this. We all hear it. So Jake's got a little one behind him over there, obviously, and we're all dads, and we have to deal with this kind of stuff sometimes. But yeah, I agree with you that if you're gonna ferment in a keg, I've never done this. I've never fermented in a keg because I plan to try. I'm still kind of on the hunt for like really large kegs, like 7-gallon kegs, so that we can do more fermentation in kegs, because I love the idea of closed fermentation. But Jake, tell me what you think about this. If you are going to ferment and serve in a keg, if that's your plan, you have to cut up your dip tube, right? So you're not sucking up just pints of trube. But then my recommendation, just based on the last kettle trube experiment that we did, would be to maybe try to reduce the amount of kettle trube that you're racking over to your keg, because it does seem like, at least for really pale styles, that if you get too much kettle trube in there, it might have an impact on that on the flavor and aroma of your beer. And to me, it wasn't a good impact. But then also maybe drink that beer kind of quick,
right?
Because there's a possibility, and I don't think autolysis is much of an issue. That's yeast death, basically. Which can impart some really nasty flavors. Like I've had a beer that tasted like burnt rubber, which is said to have been potentially because of autolysis. And so you want to avoid that. If you drink that beer fast enough and you're getting out of the beer what it is you're looking for, let's say it's clear and it tastes good and it smells good, then by all means, there's nothing technically wrong with that process. I just think you need to take some, precautions and be thoughtful about your approach if you plan to do that. It's something I've never done, though.
Yeah, I've done it a few times. I've never served from it. One thing I did notice with fermenting in these corny kegs, and I don't know if it was, a correct observation or just, something that happened my couple times doing it, was that there seemed to be way less yeast trube at the bottom. I don't know if just given the nature of how a corny keg is in terms of, its dimensions, I don't know if that causes yeast to flocculate less or what.
But I don't know why it would or wouldn't, but that's interesting observation to me. But I think he's asking about, is this true basically going to have some sort of a negative impact on the beer? I mean, I think if you're racking too much kettle trube, it can. But if you're cautious and that yeast being in contact with the beer, I don't think that's going to have a huge issue if you're drinking your beer kind of fast. So he's got one final question on lager fermentation temperature.
Yep. Have you or any of you Brülosophy crew had the opportunity to try White Lab's WLP 925 high pressure lager yeast? I don't know what the root strain of this is, but since I have been pressure fermenting, I've tried it and I've been pleased with it. It was recently moved into their core yeast catalog, so I'm wondering if this method is gaining in popularity.
So, okay, I've got a couple of thoughts on this. The idea, first off, behind a high pressure lager yeast, as far as I can tell, is to allow for quicker turnaround of lager beers by adding pressure so that you can ferment warmer. Now, one thing that we've talked about a lot is fermenting warmer. In my experience, and we've got some experiments to back this up, but I don't want to rely on those to try to prove myself right. In my experience with specific yeast strains, lately it's been Imperial Yeast L17 Harvest. And then they've got their global strain, which is L13 as well. And that's the Weihenstephan strain. I believe Harvest is maybe Eyinger or something like that. But regardless, when I use those yeast fermented just like I would ferment an ale, and I will qualify this by saying on the homebrew scale, 5-gallon batches, those beers are turning out just as good, if not better, than when I use those yeast fermented cold. Now, I know that is blasphemy. That sounds terrible, that I'm probably lying to everyone out there because the warm fermentation yeast gods are paying me off or something. But the truth is, I actually do genuinely not notice all of this feared off flavors when I do that. So to get back to WLP 925 high pressure lager yeast, in my I've never used it, Frank. I've never used that yeast. I likely never will use that yeast unless we're doing an experiment with it, because I don't see the point. I like the beers that I'm making, and I'm turning around in the same amount of time that I'm turning around beers fermented with ale yeast, which is about a week or two, and I like them, and they don't taste any different to me than the cool fermented versions. So I guess that's kind of my take on this question.
Yeah, I mean, he does ask if this method is gaining in popularity, and I do think it is, especially with New England IPAs and what seems to be, insane oxidation occurring very, very fast. I think people are looking for a way to remove all oxygen from that post-boil process, and pressurized fermentation can definitely help with that.
Well, closed fermentation, and with closed fermentation, closed transfers, all of that stuff, I think is definitely gaining in popularity. Absolutely. I've not seen the whole high pressure lager yeast or high pressure. And by high pressure, isn't it something like 10 PSI or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think in Greg's experiments that he did, I think one of them capped out at 10 PSI and the yeast was just fine.
Yeah. I mean, they work. I don't know if that's a method, particularly in terms of making lager beer, that's growing in popularity. Absolutely. Closed fermentation, closed transfers. If I'm making New England IPA, I'm doing everything I can to keep it away from oxygen at this point, on the cold side in particular. But have you ever fermented under pressure, Jake?
Just the spunding experiment, and that wasn't, I guess it was technically fermenting under pressure, but
right.
No, not really.
What are your thoughts on lager yeast and using high pressure to try to turn them around quicker?
I think I'd be interested to try it out. I can't see it making a difference just based on other experiments we've done. In my experience, using just regular lager yeast at higher temperatures.
Right. To address something Frank asked about, he mentioned about the root strain. I mean, my guess is if they're calling it a lager yeast, it's probably a Saccharomyces pastorianus or Carlsbergensis. So, to call it a lager yeast, I guess that kind of has to be in that family. But yeah, I don't know what would make it. I mean, it's interesting to me. Now I actually do want to play with this yeast and use it at high pressure and then do one at, normal pressure. And just see if it's, if it actually makes a difference. Do different fermentation temperatures, do all that kind of stuff, because I just have a hard time believing that adding that pressure is gonna change anything. I mean, just based on the experiments that we've done, based on my own maybe bias and what I've done. But those are my thoughts on that particular strain and fermenting under pressure.
Yeah, I've got no more thoughts on it. I don't know where it came from. I would guess maybe one of the larger lager breweries in America.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a good question. And I guess the key is if you're enjoying the beers that you're making using it, there's no need to change. Maybe do some experimentation on your own with it, though, Frank. That might be kind of cool. Well, that's all the time we've got. I hope our answers were at least sufficient enough. We plan on doing these Brü A episodes every 10th episode. So our next one will drop in a little over 2 months. If you have a question you want answered on the show, send them to feedback@brulosophy.com or marshall@brulosophy.com, or you can ask them on social media. We're out there on pretty much all the platforms. Just be sure to indicate that they are for Brü A. All right. Don't forget to head over to brulosophy.com to read our experiments, the Hop Chronicles, Short and Shoddy, and all the other stuff we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.